Hello loves, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna have a very important conversation that I think needs to be had. But before we get started, tonight is the last night to get tickets to my Healing Generational Trauma, Healing the Matriarch. It is an ancestor work workshop that we're doing tomorrow. There's 2 weeks to get tickets. One is like a little bit of a perk though. So the first way is to click the link down in the description and get tickets through Eventbrite. And the second way is to become a Patreon member, High Priest level. The cool thing about being a Patreon member, High Priest level is that you get access to all of my past workshops. I don't like to let my past workshops go to waste because we covered a lot of really important information on those workshops. So basically I make them accessible to the Patreon members so they can always like go back, do the meditations, do the spell work, do the like the whole entire things. So that's the second way. Also, I released my Healing the Ancestor workbook today. The link will be for my website will be down below if you want to get a copy, but we're going to be using it during the workshop as well. So with that being said, we're going to get started with this conversation. I'm going to try not to rant. So today we're going to have a very important conversation about closed practices, because this is something that I feel like a lot of people have issues respecting. And a lot of people have issues just understanding and accepting the need of closed practices and why it generally is important to gatekeep in the spiritual community, especially for BIPOC spirituality. And the best example of the need to really gatekeep is yoga. Is anything that comes from India, literally just anything that comes from India has been actively colonized and mass produced and mass misinformation, just the most when it comes to Hinduism. And it is really, really sad. It is really unfortunate. And I know a lot of Hindu creators who are actively trying to combat it and actually actively trying to call it out and correct a lot of the stuff. But a lot of the damage has been done, and it's going to be a process for them to like really reclaim a lot of the things that have just been mainstream, watered down, it's just been a mess. Let's just be real. It's been a mess. Okay. So when it comes to closed practices, a lot of people feel very, very entitled to certain aspects just because they have it in their ancestry. I see this happen a lot in my comment section, especially on TikTok. People just be like, oh, especially with the Orishas, let me tell you, it just be like, oh no, it's it's in my blood. So elders, babalaos, they should be teaching it. It should be open. Everybody should be learning about it. Everybody should know. Everybody should have access to all of this information. Why are y'all gatekeeping? Especially then this is speaking to people who are in the Caribbean or who have been initiated and it's generally the Caribbean. Oh, why are you guys gatekeeping? Why you guys don't teach? Why you guys do all this stuff? First of all, one of the things that I want y'all to understand, especially about Santeria Lukumi, is that the houses that you're in generally function like a little tribe, okay? It functions like a community because it is, and technically it's an indigenous religion. It is indigenous spirituality, and it is practiced as a community back in Nigeria, okay? And so it cannot be open. The home cannot be open for everybody if it's only meant for the people living in that house, okay? So you have to understand that if you want to be a part of that home, you have to do the legwork to come into that home, to speak to the people in that home, to become a part of that community before you think that just because your ancestor, your blood, what's running through your blood entitles you to anything. Because it doesn't. It really doesn't. The amount of disrespect that I personally have seen of people just actively just wanting to just do whatever they want just because it's something is in their blood is insane. One of the ones that irks me the most is the whole calling the Orishas gods and goddesses. Y'all, it irks me on an ancestral level. Like I literally feel my Yoruba ancestors just screaming. Anytime it happens, I'm just like, first of all, and this is really my problem with it. One, you're looking at the Orishas through a European lens, which means that one, you're not decolonizing your spirituality, you're not decolonizing your practice, you're looking at them through a European lens, which means that you don't understand what an Orisha is, which means that you don't understand who that specific Orisha is. You don't understand who Oshun is. You don't understand who Yemaya or Shango is. You don't understand what they are. You're just going to see them as the equivalent of a god, which is the European version or the European understanding of what they think, who they think we're working with. Because they think we're worshiping, they think we're doing all of these things that we're actively not doing. Nobody's worshiping nobody, okay? A lot of these ancestral spirits that we have are actually ancestral spirits. We're not distancing ourselves from them. We are a part of them. It's different than gods and goddesses. It's different than a lot of different European paths. And the definitions for different beings throughout BIPOC spirituality varies in explanation. Okay, there's a difference between a semi and an Orisha. There's a difference between a semi and a god and goddess. But for some reason, people love to look at things to a European perspective just because they speak English. When the language still exists. I cannot stress that enough. That's another part about practicing an ATR. You're going to be exposed to different language that has been passed down by the ancestors and by peoples who still are alive. The tribes are still there, okay? If you are trying to reconnect, part of reconnecting is learning your indigenous language, okay? Part of reconnecting is understanding the way that they view what they believe in, why they do what they do, not the way that you were taught how to do, because part of decolonizing is to break down in your brain the things that through colonization you have learned, indoctrinated, especially religiously, how we've been religiously indoctrinated to look and perceive certain things about our practices. Okay, and so we cannot look at Thor and be like, that's the same as Shango. Oh my God. Imagine. Not even close. Not even close. When people call the Orishas gods and goddesses, you're telling me that you don't understand what an Orisha is. You don't even understand that there's so many different paths for each Orisha. You don't even understand that sentence, basically, because you're looking at it through a European lens. In order to understand the ATRs, you need to look at it through the lens of the people, okay? Which means you cannot come at it with entitlement. The only thing that you're entitled to is to learn. You're entitled to learn. You're entitled to learn. And some people will have to learn the hard way, unfortunately. Some people will have to learn through a lot of years and years put in. But just growing up in the islands, I would tell you that there's a humbling effect. We're like all trained to be humble to the Loas, to the Misterios, to these spirits, because they're not to just be disrespected and messed with and spoken about in certain ways, and like they're not to be addressed in like certain fashions and stuff like that. And sometimes I'd be seeing some of that stuff on social media. I'd be seeing like a lot of weird misinformation, and like even people, y'all, there's people on tarot TikTok who are actively trying to channel Oshun and Shango through tarot cards. That's literally not how you talk to them. Like there's an ancestral protocol to doing this stuff, and people just think that just because they have it in their ancestry that they could just do whatever they want, that they could just, you know, call upon them just because it's in their ancestry. It's weird. One of the things that I will say about close practices historically is that back in the day, ancestrally in ancient times, there were times where different tribes, indigenous tribes around the world, indigenous is a global term, would, you know, come together and partake and interchange with each other. But through colonization, things has had to be kept in order to be preserved. Just think of it like a museum. Like if everybody is just out here playing around and touching all these ancient artifacts, they're gonna get worn down, they're gonna break, they're gonna go through. it's just going to become really diluted to the point where it's not worth that much, or it's just full of misinformation and misunderstanding. So it is important to respect closed practices for how, like, what they are. It is important to approach it with respect. It is important to, you know, not approach it with entitlement. One of the things that one of the podcasts, my most recent podcast, is all about ancestral entitlement and thinking that just because something is in your ancestry, like, that you could just do whatever you want and be out here spreading misinformation about your, like, ancestry and your, like, ancient practices that are part of your ancestry. It does not, just because something's part of your ancestry does not make you an elder. It doesn't make you someone who's a professional, someone who's knows what they're talking about. You're just someone that has it in their ancestry, okay? You have to do the legwork to reconnect. And I always tell people, you want the door to be open, you want that closed door to be open, you're gonna have to do the legwork, you're gonna have to connect, you're gonna have to seek the community. It's literally the same thing when it came to, and one of the things that's happening right now within the American continent is the reconnecting Native movement that's been happening for those who have Native ancestry all across Turtle Island, the American continent. There has been folks reconnecting to different Native tribes and learning their language and figuring out their heritage, figuring out aspects of their language, because part of colonization was to erase our Native side. The reason why we're all collectively enjoying this land is because we have been indoctrinated to continue to oppress Natives and continue to oppress the land, continue to misuse and continue to disrespect the spirits of this land by allowing capitalism to just completely run amok in here. One of the things I always say is that the oppression of Native Americans in their own lands benefits everybody except for Natives, because they don't get any benefit from it. If anything, they get completely drained. If you look at Spain, one of the things that Spain did was that they had a whole different game plan as to, like, how they were going to approach colonization, which is why they approached in, like, mixing. They, like, mixed with, like, the natives. That was one of the reasons why when they first came, they started immediately doing a lot of really things and started mixing with the natives so that they can have claim to the land, so that their descendants have claim to the land, okay? And looking at the Iberian Peninsula's history, it makes sense why they approached it this way, because the Iberian Peninsula was literally colonized by the Moors, like, for a really long time. And this is one of the reasons why Latinos generally have North African ancestry. I have a lot of North African ancestry, from Morocco all the way to across Arabian, Egyptian, all of the things. It's because of Spain, because we're technically, Latinos are technically double African, because of that. But they're mixed themselves. They were already mixed. A lot of people like to see, oh no, but the Spanish are just white people. Not all of them are. There are a good majority of them are really mixed. Obviously the crown is not that mixed, but they're very mixed over there, because throughout, you know, different invasions and stuff that's happened within Iberian Peninsula. It didn't happen in France, it didn't happen in England, obviously. So the Spanish tends to be generally mixed, and so when they came here, they had that same kind of concept. And this is why a lot of, like, Latinos have a lot of, like, they go through an identity crisis when it comes to trying to figure out who they are, trying to figure out, you know, how to connect to the different aspects of their culture, especially to our Native side. There's been a lot of migrations generally that have occurred throughout time. And so it has impacted us in different ways. And so there's been a movement to, you know, reconnect back to Native heritage. And that is absolutely something that you can also do within your African ancestry, because there's different ways to connect and learn. And I know I have a lot of friends that have flown to Africa just to go and learn from the indigenous tribes that are there about their heritage. I've seen it happen so many different times. It's not something that's always ideal, and it's something that is definitely a commitment, but there's definitely a lot that can be said about, if you want to actually learn about these things, the people who it originates from is the best place to learn. Now, if you want to look at it from a diasporic perspective, because within the diaspora, the Caribbean is like that bridge point, right? It's the bridge point because colonization started with us. So it's the bridge point of the ATRs. This is why you see so many different forms of ATRs in the Caribbean. And it's because of the different tribal influences that we have, including our native side. In every single, pretty much every single like ATR, there's also a native foundation to it. We have native division in Puerto Rican voodoo and also Dominican voodoo and also Haitian voodoo. Santeria, there's a portion of Lucumí that is very much founded in Taino spirituality as well, especially when it comes to plants. And plant medicine and all of the jazz. That's a whole video for another day, because I wanted to do a video breaking down some of the different influences between the ATRs in the Caribbean. But the Caribbean tends to be the bridge point of the diaspora, right? Because we ancestrally, the ancestors got to still express our culture, still, you know, kind of contribute to their to the culture, and especially spiritually, they still were allowed to practice certain things. Yes, certain things got synchronized with, you know, the saints, because colonization and because religious indoctrination, but they were still able to practice their beliefs and really, you know, build these religions that are very, very blended. Y'all, if y'all were to study the ATRs in the Caribbean, y'all be like, how many influences they have? We have a lot of tribal influences, including Native American influences, because our Taino spirituality is spread all across. It's the foundation of all of them. And so there's a lot of different influences from a lot of places. And the history of the Caribbean in the diaspora has a huge impact on how we perceive certain things today. But there's a lot of these things that are very much closed, and there's a lot of these things that require an elder. There's also a huge part of it that it's like, especially in certain parts of the island, especially Puerto Rican voodoo, Dominican voodoo, that is slightly open. And when I say slightly, I just mean that there isn't necessarily, like, if you wanted, the way that you're perceived to work with certain laws, misterios, are not as strict as, say, Haitian voodoo or Lucumí per se. That's, I feel like I'm being vague, but if you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. Just because the way that they can be worked with. But if you are trying to navigate and come into a closed practice, do the legwork, do the research. Don't automatically trust everybody in the community. There's some people who are scammers. There's some people who are pervs. People are human, okay? Even people in these communities, don't just put them up on a pedestal just because they're an elder in the community. Get to know them, get to know the house, get to know the community. Do the legwork. Don't just think that just because you have something in your ancestry that you can disrespect it, that you can just completely shit over it, and that's gonna be fine. Because what you will find is a huge wall. And if you disrespect different spirits, it's a whole nother problem. It's a whole nother equation. So it's important to come at them correctly. It's important to understand why BIPOC spirituality is closed now, especially because it needs to be closed now. And if you want it to partake and reconnect, you have to do the legwork to do so. The door's just not going to be super open. You're going to have to knock. It's as simple as, hey, I'm putting in the work, and hopefully, you know, ancestors guide me to the right person. Ancestors make sure that I'm, you know, being led to the right place, and really navigate it that way so that you can be in a solid spot. Okay. So yeah, that is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about closed practices, because I feel like it's super important to talk about. It's super important to understand and not dismiss, and just respect at the end of the day, as you're going down your journey, as you are reconnecting, as you are trying to understand different things, and as you're doing research. make sure that you approach it correctly and that you don't contribute to misinformation, because sitting here and calling Orishas gods and goddesses is straight up uplifting white supremacy, and you're contributing to the death of the language of the ancestors, contributing to misinformation about these spirits, these beings, because they're very complex. And just calling them a god or goddess does not do them justice to who they truly are. And there's no, oh, Abby, but it's just a translation. No, it's not. No, it's not. Especially not spiritually. No, it's not. They have a word in the language. There's a whole process. Respect that. It's as simple as that. Respect your ancestral practices. Don't shit over it. Anyway, with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see y'all in the next one. I'll see y'all tomorrow for the workshop. Have a very blessed day.